Next, from Springfield, we sit down with Rob Karr, President and CEO of the Illinois Retail Merchants Association. We talk to Mr. Karr about what IRMA believes are abusive whistleblower lawsuits threatening Illinois retailers and ways the state can improve Illinois' business climate. This runs about 25 minutes.
Rob Karr, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Thanks for having me.
Recently you had a press release come out from your office concerning a new type of a lawsuit that was impacting negatively your members, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about it and why you have concerns about it.
About 10 years ago, one law firm found a novel way to sue businesses in Illinois, primarily retailers, but not exclusively retailers. And they're called qui tam suits, Latin for someone suing on behalf of themselves and the king. And they filed under the False Claims Act of the state of Illinois. And that act was intended to apply to whistleblowers, people who had found problems within government procurement. And we're calling that out. And it provided a reward, as it should, for those true whistleblowers. This law firm, and you have to give them credit, they're inventive. They found a way to sue businesses under that act. And they're suing them for not collecting what they deem to not be properly collecting the tax on shipping and handling when you make a purchase and have the product shipped to your residence or your business. And they're called qui tam suits. And there's been 789 of them filed to date, and that number continues to grow.
I'm still a little confused, and maybe the viewers would be too. Maybe I'm just slow.
No, it's complicated.
So if I order something from a retailer in the state of Illinois, and they send it to me, does it matter if it's sent by their truck or if it comes via, like, UPS?
It doesn't necessarily matter, no. Other tests matter. For example, was an in-store pickup option available? And if it, regardless of where it was, if it was, then there.
Before we get into the exclusions, sure. Let me see if I can get the big picture. So I order whatever I order, a gizmo from a retail store. They deliver it to my home.
Right.
And the suit is alleging, I'm not sure what they're alleging, that
So the only way to answer this is to get into how the sales tax law is interpreted and applied by the Illinois Department of Revenue. So let's assume you go into a local retailer and you purchase a TV and you have it delivered to your home, regardless of how you have it delivered, on their truck or via a delivery service. They don't know at the point of sale, the retailer doesn't know at the point of sale exactly what that delivery charge is going to be, what the true cost is going to be. So let's assume they charge you $20 to deliver. If the true delivery cost turns out to be $15, the retailer should be charging and collecting and remitting tax on that $5. If it's $25, which is the true cost of delivery, then they don't owe anything in terms of that difference. So that's how it's applied. And when the Department of Revenue goes in and they audit you, they will look and say, okay, typically you've got X number that were taxable, X number that were not, you're good. They're looking for outliers. They're looking for percentages that don't make sense. They're looking for you buying a $100 TV and having a $100 delivery charge. That's not going to happen. What these suits are alleging is that tax should have been paid on on $3 as opposed to $5, or on $8 as opposed to $3. Whatever that difference is, that's what they're alleging. Now keep in mind, again, Terry, we don't know at the point of sale what the true cost is going to be. I have no idea exactly where you live. I have no idea what trucks are going to be available. Or if you're using a shipping service, or what the weight of the product is, what size box it goes into, all of the variables that constitute a delivery charge. What the law firm is doing is looking at it backwards. They have the view of hindsight, and they're applying that hindsight under the False Claims Act to allege fraud, when in fact the business has been following the Department of Revenue laws, regulations, and interpretations, and there is no fraud. And it's costing retailers money because the firm goes in and says, listen, we found...
So they're calling, if I might, they're calling what you just described fraud, and therefore saying under the whistleblower law that, hey, a major department store or major retailer might have almost inadvertently made X number of thousands of dollars if you add up the $5 savings that they had on delivery.
And they don't say inadvertent. They just, the assumption is that the retailer is knowingly and intentionally committing fraud. That is the assumption under the lawsuits, when we all know that is not what is actually happening. And what they do is they find.
I'm sorry.
No, okay.
I was going to say, would not the courts say this is a frivolous suit? We have had established law. And if anyone's going to bring injury, it would be the Department of Revenue that would bring injury.
They have the power to do that. The courts have the power to reject these lawsuits. Here's the catch for most retailers, though, and we heard testimony from two of them in front of the Senate Revenue Committee earlier this week. One of them got sued for an 80 cents on a transaction. The law firm then takes transactions over a 6-year period, extrapolates that 80 cents, and comes up with an exorbitant figure, let's say $250,000. They then say to the business, okay, you can defend yourself. It's going to cost you $80,000, $100,000, $120,000, or you can pay us $30,000 in a settlement. Any business, particularly the business that was testifying, couldn't afford that. Couldn't afford 50, could barely afford the $25,000 he ultimately agreed to settle the lawsuit. It's a perfected form of highway robbery.
And at this point, there's only one law firm doing this?
At this point, to our knowledge, there's only one law firm that's done it. If there's others, they've only done a couple, but most of the 789 lawsuits that have been filed to date have been filed by the Shedd, Diamond, and Shedden law firm.
And how long, over what period of time were the 789 lawsuits brought?
Over the last decade, but again, they've quickened as they've perfected their art. They started with a couple tests over a couple years, and as time goes on, they're broadening the number of businesses that they're attacking, and the number of suits that are being filed are increasing.
Have any of these gone to court, or are they all?
Five.
Five
that I'm aware of have gone to court. 3 have been ruled on. All 3 the law firm lost, and 2 are pending. But again, it's not the track record, it's what you're willing to risk, right? Again, they've perfected the sweet spot of tempting someone to say, just give us 10, 20, 30,000, or you risk $100,000, $200,000, $300,000.
Is it possible that the retailer could then turn around and bring suit against the firm for malicious prosecution?
Well, I'm not an attorney, Terry, but under the current...
I don't know if prosecution would be the right term, but...
Under the current law, I don't see how, because the law firm is clearly exercising a loophole that exists in the False Claims Act. So I don't know what the grounds would be for such a suit.
And then, so what is the answer? Is there a legislative answer where you're trying to close that loophole, for lack of a better word?
Well, the answer is to do what the Act does for the income tax, which is it exempts it entirely from its provisions. The False Claims Act was borrowed from the federal government, and many states imported it from the federal government. We imported it quickly. Nobody ever thought about the fact that we need to exempt sales tax from its provisions. And so that's what needs to really be done if you're going to really correct the problem. There's another way, though. There's 2 bills, Senate Bill 1828 is one of them, which sets up a system whereby the law firm or anyone else can bring a suit alleging a wrong. The Department of Revenue has to review it. If the Department of Revenue says no, then the law firm can appeal to the AG's office. If the Attorney General's office says no, the suit dies. If the Attorney General says you can go forward, then the law firm can go forward. It at least sets up something of a check and balance on these type of suits. It's not perfect, but it's better. And it also deprives the economic advantage. It takes the highway robbery out of it. It encourages those who are really blowing the whistle on real fraud from bringing suits, and discourages those like the Shedden firm that are simply looking to skim something off of other employers.
Have you had any feedback as far as trying to plug that hole?
We're trying it. As you know, legislation can move slowly sometimes in the State House.
When you talk to members, what is their reaction in general when they hear that this is happening?
Members of the Assembly or members?
Legislative members.
Legislators? Many legislators are, even for all that's been going on, many legislators are really just starting to learn about it. But those that have are angry about it. Those that have had businesses don't understand it. They don't understand why this legislation isn't moving forward. They don't understand why Illinois is needlessly giving itself a black eye it doesn't need. why it's sending this message to employers that not only are we going to tax you in the manners that we do, not only are we going to regulate you in the way you do, now you're not only answerable to the Department of Revenue, you're going to be answerable to any law firm that decides they want to sue you. And that carries terrible implications, Terry, because what's missed beyond that is all of your sales tax information that's confidential now spills into the public. And you lose all the protections that you have under the Department of Revenue, who is the true enforcement arm of tax law.
And that would be critical why? Because people don't want to necessarily know what the sales levels, their level of sales are? Or?
Right. Anytime particularly for retailer, you don't want to share the inside knowledge of what your sales are, what taxes you're paying, what your cost of product is. All of those are competitive advantages that if they're available to your competitor, they have a significant insight into how they're doing business. Whether or not they can do something to attack your business is another matter, but they certainly have significant insight. And on the other side, it's important not to lose those protections the Department of Revenue affords legitimate taxpayers.
How much fear, for lack of concern, maybe is a better word, concern rather than fear, how much concern is there among your retail members over this issue?
They're highly agitated about it. They bring it up every year that we're down here for our retail day. They bring it up in our conversations. We discuss it nearly every board meeting. So we continue to probe ways to move the issue forward. They look around the table, they see some of their peers, they know of other, at the board table, they know other of their peers in their communities that have been sued. They get it, and they're not happy about being sued for following state law.
Let's, if we might, unless there's something else we need to add to that, I'd like to move on to some other issues. Let's just say that would be perhaps, obviously one thing that people in the business community and the retail community would say is not conducive to doing business in Illinois. The governor has talked about improving the business climate in Illinois. Are there some other issues that are high on the agenda that you would like to have addressed to make business or in Illinois more business friendly for retailers?
Sure. I think there's a great sympathy out there in the employer community about workers' comp reform. Everyone admits and gives great credit, for example, to Senator Kwame Raoul, Representative John Bradley, for the leadership they showed, for the leadership Speaker Madigan, Senate President Cullerton showed in 2011 when they pushed that workers' recomp forward. IRMA was an integral part of those discussions, and it has had an impact, a positive impact. But everyone also knows at the time that was just a beginning step. So there are other things that need to be done. And it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly what the governor's talking about that would help make Illinois more competitive. Well, again, we're not talking about becoming Indiana or Alabama. We're talking about becoming average. For all of those advantages that we achieved through that workers' comp reform, we're still the 7th or 9th highest, depending how you measure it in the nation. We used to be 23. It'd be great if we just returned to being average.
How long ago were we 23?
I think we were 23 in the mid-90s. It might have been the late 90s, Terry, but either way, it has not been that terribly long
ago. So the costs have actually gone up dramatically then, you would argue, over the last 20 years or so.
Correct.
And a lot of people who have never run a business don't really quite understand work comp, but you would say it's a direct tax, you might say, on the cost of doing business in Illinois?
Well, I want to be fair. It is supposed to be a no-fault approach to healing the worker, and that should exist.
If they're injured.
If they're injured on the job.
On the job. But that's one of the key issues, isn't it?
That is an issue. What constitutes on the job? Are they really getting hurt on the job? But even if they are, there's little things that can take place, whether the shoulder should be considered part of the arm, how you go about arbitrating, what medical standards you apply to measuring the scope of the injury. Again, IRMA has never advocated for anything short of making the worker as whole as they can be. There are some injuries that don't ever return you to whole. Making the whole that they can be, enabling them to be a productive member of society again. But there are things we can do to improve that. On another front, I think you have to look at taxes. No one believes that we're going to get out of the budget situation we're in here or in the city of Chicago, for example, without some sort of additional revenues. I think business, by and large, thrives on certainty. There is no certainty in the state of Illinois, and certainly in the city of Chicago right now if you're an employer. They don't know what their tax bill is going to be, not only for income tax, but sales tax. They see the exposure growing as the problem remains unsolved here, as the pension costs continue to escalate. They don't see fair share by others. And then they see other issues piled on top of them, whether it's scheduling mandates or paid leave mandates, or now you have the mayor in the city of Chicago talking about imposing a $500 million property tax increase, but now he wants it primarily to apply just to commercial industrial property owners. That's a significant deterrence to investing in the state of Illinois. And people don't understand whether you're a big company like Walmart or you're Rob's Ace Hardware and you have one store, you have a limited amount of capital to invest each year. And you're going to invest that capital where you can get the best rate of return. And if it's not Illinois, it's going to be somewhere else. And we ought to make Illinois the place where they at least say, we've got a fighting chance on our best ROI, we're going to invest here.
One of the discussions as far as increasing revenue without necessarily raising the sales tax is to spread or without raising the income tax, I should say, is to spread the sales tax to services. What is IRMA's position on that?
We're actually open to that idea. Now, we have not come out publicly and said we support it, but neither have we said we oppose it. The question becomes how you do it and what is it being used for. What we don't want to see is what happened in Cook County, right? The Cook County board president recently increased the sales tax in Cook County to now the highest in the nation, told everyone it was for pension, and a week later turned around and gave 6% salary increases to employees. That's not what it was intended for. So that will be a key in that discussion, is what is the state going to use it for? If it's simply going to grow more spending, then we're never going to get out of this cycle. But it does have some advantages to spread that out over the service tax because it stabilizes. The broader your base, the lower your rate, the better your rate of return on taxes. And if the state were to apply that, they could bring in more revenue at less pain for everyone.
As we sit here, it's probably a situation like none of us have seen before relative to the tug of war between the governor and the legislative leaders. Here's the Republican Governor Rauner in his first go around to get a budget. He vetoed the entire budget with the exception of the education bill. But now we find ourselves spending, depending on what number you use, 80%, 90% of what we would have been spending with the budget.
Right.
The only people it seems that we're not sending money to is higher education and some of the social service nonprofits. What is your thought on all this? I mean, you're trying to keep your fingers on the pulse. You're a guy who watches this. And to what extent, if any, does the new administration reach out and solicit input from people like yourself who represent the retailers?
Well, I've been at this 22 years and counting. And there are others who might watch this who have been at far longer than I. But I haven't met anyone who's ever been in this situation before. No one knows how this plays out. No one knows how this ends. We've had budget stalemates in the past, you've witnessed them, that have gone long. We've had nothing go this long, and we've never had this type of lack of communication between the various parties. I wish I had a better idea of how it's going to end. I just know that as time goes on, the liabilities get worse, the backlog grows, and the pain that it's going to cause all of us to get out of it worsens. I think if everyone's fair, everyone has a legitimate argument on some of the changes that need to occur. As I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a legitimate need for revenue. There's a legitimate need for cost control. There's a legitimate need for other reforms. I think it's just going to depend on, at some point we'll get to an agreement. I just hope it's before the entire place, the clock runs down.
I know it hurts people obviously like higher education. They're waiting to get their monies, and many of these small nonprofits are in danger of going out of business because they don't have the financial wherewithal to weather the storm, so to speak. To what extent, relative to retail merchants in the state of Illinois, is this a sideshow or does this directly impact them?
Oh, it directly impacts. I mean, so for example, we have pharmacies in our membership. To the extent that they're Medicaid clients, Medicaid bills aren't being paid, at some point, a pharmacy that's accepting Medicaid has to make a decision. We can no longer afford to float tens of hundreds of millions of dollars to the state government because the banks that they go to for lines of credit do want to get paid at some point, and there's limits to how much credit you can take out. So it hurts those pharmacies. It hurts their clients if the pharmacy has to withdraw from the Medicaid program for lack of payment. It hurts our customers, whether they're an employee or of a not-for-profit or a state employee or whomever they may be in some program, and they're not able to get assistance. It hurts them as well. No one escapes from this, I think, without some sort of pain. So that's how we feel it, though. When
you talk to your members, and to to what extent we hear different people leaving the state. I often hear it more in the context of manufacturers, and there, as we've discussed with workers' comp, it's often brought up that the cost of doing that might be as much as $1 million a year more in Illinois if you're a big manufacturer like a Caterpillar or so. To what extent do you hear from your members that, you know, we're looking to move out of town, or if we're going to, out of state, I should say, or if we're going to expand, we're going to expand out of state and not continue to add jobs here?
You do hear you're not going to expand here. It goes back to what I mentioned before. You have a limited capital budget, and you're going to go where your best rate of return is. They're not going to do it here. They're not going to expand another line here. The thing with manufacturing is, and I applaud them for it because it helps their representatives make their case, it's hard to just close a manufacturing line without getting noticed. Often retailers, particularly the smaller independent retailers, simply fade away from their community. They're open one day, they're gone the next. They don't have to report to anyone. They just disappear. Their sales tax is off the roll. The 2, 5, 10 employees they had are no longer being paid. They go without any fanfare. And I think that's happening far more than we realize. It's gutting neighborhoods. It's leaving them without the ideal that people have. And retail is often overlooked in this area because people think, well, retail can't go anywhere. Well, in fact, they can. They just go away. And if they want to, they sell on the internet. The internet's changed the dynamic, and we continue to be locked in 20th century thinking in a 21st century environment. And
let's follow up on that. First of all, I wanted to ask, when we talk about the Retail Merchants Association, how many members do you have? And obviously they would be, I would think, across obviously the state.
They're all over the state. We have 20,000 member stores throughout the state of Illinois, and those come in all types and sizes and all product lines, from restaurants to hardware stores to pharmacies, groceries, you name it. We've got some aspect of that in our membership, so we get a broad sampling of that.
And the internet. Where are we on the internet sales tax? For a long time there was no sales tax applied to internet sales. What is the law now?
Well, the law in the state of Illinois is, if you're here, it is due and owing. And we need to be clear on that. The tax has always been due and owing in the state of Illinois. The question is, who's going to pay it? Either the business is collecting it, the online retailer, which they weren't because of the state of federal law, or the consumer owes it. Now, when you get your tax...
If I order something from an Amazon.
An Amazon, right. So my daughter, for example, I have a daughter who, very accomplished dancer. You would get a lot of her specialty dancewear is only available online, at least when you're living in the middle of central Illinois. So you get that online, and every year we fill out our income tax, and we have to report, self-report, what the retailer, the online retailer, didn't collect in sales tax, and we do that. And that is incumbent upon all Illinoisans to do. If they're not doing it, if they ever get audited and caught, they're subject to all the fines and penalties, and we just think that's unfair. We have done everything in the state of Illinois we can do to position it so that the businesses, those online businesses, have to collect and remit the tax. The battle is now in Washington, D.C. We're hopeful that in the next year or so that they will ultimately pass the authorizing legislation that will make it possible for all the states to collect the tax that's due and owing.
So that any of us who are just going online and buying something, then we wouldn't have to worry about it directly ourselves.
You would not have to worry. You would no longer be exposed to that.
The way that legislation would be proposed or being looked at, what about local municipal governments? Would it do away so you don't have to worry about all the individual little municipal governments adding some percentage on the sales tax?
No, they would still be included, at least in the current iteration of the bill. Things may change, Terry. You know, it's Washington. Who knows what they ultimately come up with. But it would operate much like the Visa and MasterCard processing network. You would have an entity that would be responsible. They would be the ones that would set the rates, have the software, collect the tax, and then remit it to the various states. So that burden would be relieved from the retailer.
Before we close out, just how would you assess the current state of doing business in Illinois from the Retail Merchants Association, and how do we make Illinois a better place to do business?
Well, it's tough. I mean, retail is always tough. It has never been an easy sector. It's the most competitive. It's the most dynamic in terms of change. It's probably the most dynamic in terms of how technology is rearranging how we do business in the retail sector. So on the one hand, that makes it terribly exciting to watch and represent. On the other side, it can be disruptive. So it's very competitive. We have to worry, as I said, not only about our border states. You know, 2/3 of Illinois' population lives within a 40-minute drive of a border. It's easy to go somewhere else to shop, not to mention, as I mentioned, you have the internet on which they can collect, or which people can purchase now and make their purchases. So it's never been more competitive. It's never been more difficult to do business, and I think Illinois needs to keep mind of that fact that retail, just like any other business, is not a hostage. There's ways around everything, and every little thing, every straw we put on that proverbial heap could be the straw that breaks that camel's back.
In fact, the sales tax you just mentioned with Tony Preckwinkle, the tax in Cook County is now, what is it, 10%?
It's 10.25% in some areas.
Is there any way to know what kind of an impact that's going to have on those retailers in Cook County when you could go to a neighboring county? You wouldn't even have to leave the state to save on a sales tax on a significant purchase.
Unless it's a regulated item, it's very difficult to track. So for example, we know that when they've raised the cigarette tax, sales have spiked significantly in the Lake County, Indiana, for example. Two of the largest convenience stores in the world, at least they used to be, they may still be, exist just over the Illinois line. Their business is largely tobacco and liquor and then gas. We know when I'm sure you recall when the Quincy Bridge flooded, I want to say in the late
93,
90s.
I think
it was 93. When it flooded, was closed for 10 days. The city of Quincy lost something like 200% of the sales, and that because had a 200% increase in sales because people were no longer going across the river to West Quincy to make their purchases for gas, tobacco, liquor, and other items. Every time we do something like that, we create another reason to shop elsewhere, whether it's over that border or on the internet, and we're getting perilously close to creating a shopping cart full of reasons to go elsewhere.
Rob Karr, I know time's always short, and we'll let you go, but hopefully we can follow up again as other issues come up, but we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, anytime.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.